In recent months, two words have dominated international headlines about China: tech crackdown. From ride-hailing to e-commerce, from after-school tutoring to video games, from internet celebrities to social media channels, China's government has introduced new regulations that, quite frankly, have scared many international investors. However, if we are going to understand China, it's really important that we zoom out of the short-term noise and we ask ourselves, what are the long-term effects of these new regulations? In today's episode of Real Talk China, I'm honored to welcome back in the studio Chris Pereira, a former China executive of 15 years. Chris made his debut on the show earlier this year, and I can't think of a better guest to invite back on the show to break down some of these important issues. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to episode 13 of Real Talk China. And what I want to start off in today's conversation is really talking about this crackdown that we're seeing in China. Over the last couple of months, we've seen a lot of headlines coming out. For example, the communist government is, starting to crack down on the tech companies. We've seen education companies. We're starting to see even social media being targeted right now. And there's a lot of speculation on, what is the next industry. So let's start off with kind of your insights into the tech crackdown. Let's focus specifically on that and what your thoughts are.
Sure. Yeah, thanks. First, thanks so much for having me back. I really enjoyed the first conversation, and everyone comments and feedback. I really loved reading through that. So
yeah,
that.
Absolutely.
So the tech crackdown, it's an interesting time to be a China watcher and seeing what's happening there. And first, I think taking a zoom out to see what's happening globally is important when we're looking at what's happening in China. It's easy to look at China and say, oh, there's something huge happening there. It's only China focused. It's only them. Usually negatively portrayed that things are happening there, and I think if we look at the bigger picture in terms of tech, it's not just China that there's a big change in the market or in the industry in general. That I think since the early 90s, when the tech industry really evolved and moving into the tech boom in the early 2000s, it's really been an unregulated place, if you think about it, since that time. And what we're seeing in the last few years, for better or worse, globally, including in the U.S., Canada, Western Europe, and Asia, is more regulation coming into the industry. And of course, when you hear regulation, for me, I prefer less regulation overall. I think the market does a good job of regulating things on the bigger picture. But if we're looking at specific regulation in tech, you look at China recently saying you can only use video games for 3 hours a week. From a Western perspective, and from my perspective, that's a bit extreme. But that's a regulation that's saying, hey, we think kids are using the internet too much. We'd like to cut back, And that conversation's happening in the West too, to a smaller degree. And we've always heard that when TVs came in, that's also are we watching too much TV? And I think China can go to extremes in the regulation, but I think having a bigger picture, it's not just China that this is happening in, it's more global.
I'd like to comment on that because I was following a really big tech insider that's based in San Francisco, and she ran a poll recently on Twitter that received thousands of votes in this poll. And essentially what it said is, China is regulating the internet for the youth. Do you think that would you like to see similar requirements or similar policies here in America? And I think the average was around 70% of people had indicated, yes, we would like to have that. However, the big difference is they said, that should be left to the parents, not necessarily the government should be controlling that. So I think you really brought a good perspective is that both, Western and, Chinese, I think all of us are realizing, we're all a little bit too addicted to this phone, right? I mean, I know
for that, that's for sure.
We're all guilty of that. I mean, and it's ironic even for me as a content creator. My goal is to get people watching my content longer. So, I want everybody to be watching this video longer, but I do understand, there is, I think, again, that goes down to a cultural difference. So for example, I think what we need to look at is both Chinese and Americans and Westerners for that matter, we all realize that there's a problem here. It looks like China is being a little bit more aggressive. They have that ability to say, okay, what we're going to do? Children, for example, under the age of 18, now on the popular TikTok platform, they're going to be limited to 40 minutes a day, and they're going to be restricted from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. And I've told some of my friends here that, and they said, that's a good policy. Like you really, if you're under the age of 18, maybe monitor that a little bit more. But it is just an interesting difference here.
An interesting comparison would be the nutritional guidelines in the West. So we have this pyramid of food, and you're supposed to only have one little bit of chocolate each day, and you're supposed to eat all your grains and vegetables.
Correct.
So that's a recommendation that's not fully enforced in the West, obviously. You can eat chocolate all day if you like as a kid.
Yeah.
But would we consider that parent a good parent if they're not quote-unquote controlling their kid in some way or giving some guidance? And in 10 or 15 or 20 years, what's that child going to say about their parenting also, right?
Right.
So I agree that it is a bit more extreme on the China side, saying, hey, 40 minutes a day. But down the road, what are the consequences for that, or what are kids going to think? Hey, okay, well, I was only allowed on TikTok for 40 minutes a day, and that made me read more books, or it got me outside more, and I'm kind of happy about that. So I don't think it's black and white as with most things with China.
Yeah, I agree. I'm quite interested to see what is the effects of this long term. I'm a long term investor, for example. I'm always trying to zoom out and say, what's this company going to be worth 5-10 years from now? I'm thinking with this new policy, imagine that 10 years from now, when these kids, like you said, they're going to be reading more books, probably be playing more sport, probably having a better lifestyle, to be honest. But it is, again, just that cultural difference, I think.
And I think we should keep in mind that the rules are the rules, and then the reaction from the population is also, we'll work around those rules in many ways. You put a rock in the middle of a river, and the water goes around the rock, right?
That's right, that's right.
I think controlling, 40 minutes on TikTok, well, what about a new app? They can use something else too, right? So I think the rules, it's very difficult to control people like that.
Chris, I'm going to play devil's advocate here, and I'm going to say a headline that I've heard often here in the West, and that is the fact that this tech crackdown is, Xi Jinping and the Communist Party attacking capitalism. This is very anti-capitalistic movement. How would you respond to a headline like that?
I think it's a great question, and I'm glad you asked. So again, I would zoom out to the global trends, and I think there is a crackdown across the board on tech and the industries in general. So I think some of the regulation in tech is definitely warranted in China. I think it's interesting. In China, they're cracking down on the abuse of personal private information. So some of the crackdown is actually aimed at protecting people's information better, because in China it's basically it's well known that your data is not as well protected as in other places, and I think China's recognized this. And it's actually, if you look at when I first went to China in 2004, you could buy fake DVDs and VCDs, movies on the street.
That's right.
Just completely lack of respect for private property or IP and intellectual property.
That's right.
Whereas now it's you have to pay for your music.
Yeah.
You have to pay for movies. You have to have a subscription. It's very hard if you want to do that. It's very hard to download free intellectual property.
Absolutely.
So I think this is an extension of that in some ways. So I would push back on on that comment you just mentioned, to say that I think there's more at play here than just a power grab. I think it's thinking, how do we adjust society so that it's better for everyone.
Yeah, I think, and one point I'd like to add in there is, you look at, for example, Tencent, Alibaba. We'll use these two companies. They're obviously two of the biggest companies, very well established, but they've also become, an integral part of the Chinese life. Tencent, WeChat is the lifeline for Chinese people now, and I don't feel that it's China's government is going to come out and, let's try to destroy Tencent. Let's try to take down WeChat. Let's get rid of Taobao and everything that's Alibaba. But I think an interesting one is that in China, obviously every tech company is below the party. The party is number one. It is the governing party, for the country. And I think you can kind of see the reverse of that, let's say in America, where a lot of these tech companies are unregulated, are very much monopolies, and very much are above the government. And there's a lot of very big issue in the government trying to issue that control. So I think that's an important point people need to understand, that again, Alibaba, Tencent, JD, some of these really great companies, they have been they've played a very important role in China's poverty alleviation and the advancement of the economy. And I think they will continue to be, but they're also going to have some regulation moving forward. But again, kind of zooming out, what is the result? What is this going to be 2, 5, 10 years down the road?
This is an interesting trend in China that the government is pushing social responsibility onto large businesses. So
Yeah.
this is a trend in
Yeah.
the West too. It's actually social pressure in the West more than anything. So you have social justice,
Mm-hmm.
you have corporate social responsibility, green economy, all of these things. If you don't go with that trend in the West, you're also going to be ostracized, right?
Correct.
It's sort of a social pressure
Yeah.
plus government regulation. In China, I think you have this is regulation also to say, hey, I think I saw last week or the week before China encouraging strongly the big tech companies to donate to various causes, corporate social responsibility.
Absolutely.
So I think that's part of the equation too. That's saying, hey, it's not just about making money here in China. You also need to make our community a better place.
Yeah, and I think that's important because that's something that we've seen, so much here in the West. I mean, we have so many, great companies that are very, philanthropic and are donating. And, for example, the biggest company I've worked for is PGA Tour, which manages the golf, but they're a nonprofit. I mean, every golf tournament that they run is 100%, goes back to charity. They've donated billions of dollars back to charity efforts. And it's interesting. It's much more established, that culture perspective in North America. And I think that's something that China is learning. I always think about Warren Buffett when he and I believe Bill Gates, they went back to China at some point, meeting with Chinese billionaires saying, look, we're going to be donating 99.9% of our wealth to charity. And we would encourage you to do the same. And, obviously Bill Gates and Warren Buffett walking into a room, they're going to command the respect of any Chinese investor. And
this is the huge value of engagement with China, by the way, just to have a Western billionaire, for example, or just regular business people, they bring their ideas to China, and people hearing those perspectives can change decisions.
Yeah.
So I think that's a huge benefit of whether or not we agree with what China's doing or what the U.S. is doing. I think talking as you just mentioned, like, hey, I'm going to donate my wealth to charity.
Yeah.
That can blow people's minds if they've never heard that before.
Oh, absolutely,
Right?
absolutely. And I think you're starting to see that. And I think the other interesting thing I noticed is I shared this on Twitter last week. Is I noticed one of the very popular politicians, AOC, in America, she's from New York, represents New York, and she recently attended the Met Gala.
Right.
She had a very controversial dress, beautiful white dress, and on the back it said, "Tax the rich." And there's a very interesting movement going on in America right now where people are saying, it's not fair that we have billionaires here. What we need to do is, take their wealth and redistribute it amongst the poor in society. And I said, well, that's very interesting because that's essentially what China is also. Again, this is what we're saying. If you've done well, you're a billionaire. You have these companies like Tencent, Alibaba that are making billions upon billions. Like you said, it is about trying to raise all boats in the ocean. We're trying to get everybody needs to be improving, and I think that was. It's quite interesting. People in America, for example, I've seen videos of people protesting outside of Jeff Bezos, $20 million New York penthouse suite, saying, it's not fair that he's a billionaire. But it's also interesting because when he, was starting out 25 years ago, no one really cared about him, But it's also now that he's reached this high level, So I kind of see this interesting dynamic happening in America too, where people are actually more interested in this socialist concept and trying to make sure that everybody is improving.
Yeah, it's the Chinese phrase 树大招风. So when the tree is tall, it catches the wind. So
Yeah.
like you said, Jeff Bezos 20 years ago, not so much the focus, but now
Yeah.
going to space, he's a bit,
Yeah.
more of a focus.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but I think I guess two things for that. One is when we look at where society is going in China. Yes, China has raised hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. I think that's something most people know about these days. But
Correct.
if you look outside the tier 1, tier 2 cities to 3, 4, 5, 6, there's a lot of people with not a lot of material wealth still. They are connected to the internet. They can see what's going on in Shenzhen or Beijing and Shanghai.
Yeah.
So I think this is just a reality that to balance out that wealth, you need to encourage a culture in society that says, hey, we need to give back. Hey, it's good to go to a smaller city. Why don't we open an office there? It's cheaper.
Yep.
The workers are there, and we can give back. We can start a school. We can donate money.
Right.
So that awareness in society is something that can be brought by government, I think, but also setting up the right systems in for example, tax structure. So in the West, of course, when you donate money, you get a tax receipt.
Right.
And in China, I think there's less of an awareness of that or the need to do that. So
Right.
I think as we move forward, I think we're going to see a lot more Westernized ideas about how society is organized. So maybe in some ways this is seeing a reflection of ourselves happening in China.
Well, I think, and you know, you and I have both spent a number of years in China and been able to see China progress. And this is always something that I say is, I see this as China, you know, simply becoming more and more Westernized and more on the international scene. Very similar. When we first went to China, you could buy all of this copyrighted materials on the side of the street, and now that's changed. You know, even things like, for example, smoking. You know, that has been banned now in China. And you know, when we first went to China, it was culturally so significant to see everybody smoking everywhere. I even thought to myself, it'd be impossible to do a no smoking policy here because it's just culturally, it's just so different.
Yeah.
But you know, Beijing passed that. You know, they're kind of, everything is, you know, becoming more Westernized, becoming more at an international standard. I think that's just a natural progression for China, as it again is it's you know, continuing to become a more and more developed country, and again a true world power.
Yeah. So it's interesting. You get thrown into two corners so if you're China, for example, so it's cracking down on intellectual property, for example. If they didn't crack down, they're going to be criticized as being the lawless country that doesn't respect international norms. Whereas on the other hand, I remember being annoyed too that I couldn't buy they're controlling me. You have to pay for music now.
Yeah, exactly.
Like Napster is gone and all that.
Right, absolutely.
Controlling that stuff can lead to some unhappiness. But I think whether they quote unquote crack down or they have a more laissez-faire approach, they're going to be criticized either way. And I think they're moving in the direction of rules, regulations, and standards.
Yeah.
That I can see.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, everybody, I want to thank you for making it to this point in the video. And if you haven't already, make sure you hit that subscribe button, as I have some exciting videos coming your way in future weeks. Chris and I sit down for 2 more conversations. I'll be releasing those episodes very soon on the channel. And again, I want to thank you all for your incredible support. Just a friendly reminder that all of the content that you see on this channel is sponsored by you, the community here on YouTube, and also our loyal Patreon supporters. I want to give a huge shout out to everybody who has joined our team on Patreon. And if you're interested in supporting the work that we do here on YouTube, I'm going to click a link down below that you can join our Patreon page. In addition to that, make sure that you also visit our sponsors like today's video sponsor, Surfshark VPN, for truly some amazing deals. Everyone, my name is Cyrus Jansen. Thank you for taking time out of your day to spend it with me here on YouTube, and I look forward to seeing you all in a future video.